So glad to be here. I have had the honor of getting to visit schools and work with teachers for the last 4 days. And so this is kind of fun to be able to see some familiar faces in the crowd. But also, I just want to begin by saying I really appreciate how everyone has been so welcoming and how I've gotten an opportunity to see the amazing things happening in all of these schools. So I wanted to start with that. Real quickly, if we want to connect, here are some ways you can follow me. The first thing is I am on Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, you can feel free to direct message me or to tweet at me. I promise I don't use Twitter in the same way as our president, right? You won't say, I'm the greatest, huge, like that's not gonna be me, promise you. I do have a YouTube channel, spencervideos.com, so you'll probably notice I love to make these sketch videos. You can check out the sketch videos on that YouTube channel. I have a blog / website, spencerauthor.com, and you can email me. And please feel free to email me at john@spencerauthor.com. So again, feel free to connect. Here's where you can't follow me, so just making sure, all right? have some boundaries. I want to share, first of all, about one sentence that changed my world forever as a student. So a little bit of background about me. I was born in the 1980s. I was born in the Ice Age, where we had Ice Cube and Iced Tea and Vanilla Ice. That's where I learned how to stop and collaborate and listen. It was a time that was completely unlike this time. The best technology we had was this, all right? And I was a really good student. I played the game of school well. I knew how to behave, how to stay quiet, how to be compliant, and how to make my parents happy. And in the US, all it takes to make your parents happy is if you get B's, you're okay, right? So it's kind of different, right? Our standards are a little lower in the US. And this was me at age 13. I had a little bit of a different hairline. I was quite a lot younger, didn't have any wrinkles. And I was a really shy student. I was very shy and I was very nerdy. And so every single day at lunchtime, I would meet with my one friend, Matt. And Matt and I knew each other from church, and we loved to just nerd out and geek out on history and statistics, and we would talk about music, and we would argue back and forth about who was the greatest band ever, and I would say it was the Beatles, and he would try to tell me it was the Rolling Stones, which is so not true. And my whole goal through that age was to be invisible. If I could be invisible, make it through middle school, I would be fine. Well, there was one day where it had never occurred to me, but there was one day that Matt was sick and he wasn't at school. Now, he was always had perfect attendance. But on this particular day, he was sick, he wasn't there, and I didn't know what to do. So in the cafeteria, there's long lines, we get our food, and then we go and we sit down, and I remember standing there holding my cafeteria tray, looking out at the sea of students all around, hoping that somebody would invite me to the table. And I waited, and I waited, and it didn't happen. So I actually threw my food away, and then I went to the restroom, and I hid out for 20 minutes, and I just waited for that time to pass. Now, the reality was my goal had been to be invisible, and I was invisible. It's who I was as a student. But I was not invisible to two teachers, Mrs. Smoot and Mr. Darrow. They taught history and language arts. And they knew me. They knew me as a person. They knew that I loved baseball, still do. In fact, 2 days ago, I had to watch the World Series, right? I thought, you know what, I'm going to go explore Hong Kong, and then I realized, like, no, it's the World Series. I think I'm going to watch the World Series, right? Loved baseball. I cared about social justice. I cared about issues that happened in our world. And I loved history. And so Mrs. Smoot and Mr. Darrow said, will you be part of this National History Day project? It is a year-long project. You get to choose any topic you want in history, and in the end, there are 4 different ways that you can present your learning. You can do it in an essay, you can do it in a multimedia presentation, a video, you can do it in a slideshow, or you can do it in a speech. So I went ahead and I chose the slideshow thing, and it was pretty radical what Mrs. Smoot and Mr. Darrow said. They actually said every other Friday in our classes, we will excuse you from the regular curriculum and you get to work on this project. That was unheard of. Nobody would do that. But they were teachers themselves who had been empowered with that permission to innovate, and they did. I would love to say that this was a fun project from the very beginning, but the reality is, it was terrifying. I didn't know what to do with choice. I knew how to play the game of school, how to make teachers happy, how to make parents happy, but I didn't know how to actually own my learning. So I came up with topics that I wanted, and I had a list of 14 topics, and I went up to Mrs. Smoot and I said, which one should I choose? And I really thought she would give me an answer, and her answer was, which one will sustain your interest for a whole year? So I chose the story of Jackie Robinson, the integration of baseball, and how that influenced U.S. civil rights. And from there, I began to do research. And I remember asking Mrs. Smoot, what sources should I go to first? And she said, stick with what interests you. And when I couldn't find all the answers in articles and books, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to talk to people. And that was terrifying because I was shy. And so I sent a letter to the Negro League Museum where they had all the information of former baseball players, and I said, do you know anybody that I could interview? And the man who ran that museum not only sent a letter back, but he called me and he said, here are all the different numbers. Here are all the people who would love to be interviewed. So I started interviewing these former baseball players. I remember there were days where I would be so scared that I would get on the phone, I would dial the number, and I would hang up. I remember there was one day when I went up to Mrs. Smoot and I said, Mrs. Smoot, I just don't feel like doing interviews today. I think I'll just join the class with what we do. And she said, the nice thing about interviews is you can do them if you feel like it or not. Right? Because she wasn't going to let me get away with being afraid. I went through the whole process for months. Worked on it in school, worked on it outside of school, and then I got to go to a radio studio where we recorded our script. I recorded my script and I heard my voice for the very first time, and I looked at Mrs. Smoot and I said, I quit. Because if you know anything about 13-year-olds, they don't like the way their voice sounds. 13-year-olds tend to be very insecure, right? It happens a lot. And that's when she said this. She said, when you hide your voice, you rob the world of your creativity. And I'm not going to let you rob people of your creativity. That every student has a voice, they have a creative spark, they have a gift, and that gift has to be shared with the world. And so even though I was terrified, I went ahead and I continued. Because I had a teacher who believed in me. The night before I had to present in front of the class, it was just a practice presentation before the competition. But the night before, I couldn't get any sleep. And sleep is my favorite. I love sleep. I was so worried. What if I mess up? What if the tape deck doesn't work? What if the slides don't work? What if I click on the wrong part? What if? First period happens, it's math class, I can't focus. All I can think about is having to present. Second period comes around, it's PE, I get a little bit distracted playing games, but I'm still thinking about it. Third period happens, distracted. Lunch, come back from lunch, the room is already dark. I wait for the students to trickle in, and all I have to do is this 5-minute presentation. Easy, right? Not so much, because I put the tape in the tape deck, I get ready, and my hand is shaking so bad that I click backwards instead of forward. And then when I try to click forward, it goes backwards again, and then backwards and forward, and now there's whispering. There's laughter. There's everything I don't want to have happen is happening. And even though it feels like forever, about 10 seconds later, I find the slide, and then I click. My heart is hammering, my pulse is pounding, but I click. I've got it. I've got it. And when that presentation is done, to my surprise, although I'm embarrassed, the class actually stands up and cheers. And then I go from there to the district competition, and then the state competition, and then I got to go and present in the national competition in Maryland. But the scariest part was that very first time of sharing my creativity with someone else. And I tell you that story because that was why I became a teacher. Mrs. Smoot. She was my hero. She still is. As a dad, I asked my kids this question: what did you make today? And I got to tell you, it varies from year to year. 6th grade, my oldest son Joel would be so excited about engineering that I couldn't even ask him the question before he would start saying, we're going to do this, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And he would be so excited I could not stop him from talking about it. But then last year, the shift focused entirely toward the exams. And he would watch teachers lecture him, and he would take Cornell notes all class period. And then every single Friday, he took a test in every single class. And I watched that passion drop. And now, he's taking engineering classes again, and he's excited, and he loves it, and he wants to be an engineer. Or I think about my middle son, Micah, who his teacher, Miss Rediger, inspired such a love of writing that every single morning he would get on the computer after breakfast and chores, and he would blog. Or he would go to Storybird, and he would start writing a story. Or I would think about my daughter, Brenna, who was so excited about what she was making doing these cardboard challenges in the 3rd grade. And although they were simple and they didn't seem like a big deal to an adult, they were a big deal to her. The bottom line was, it is powerful. Now, I mentioned this, that even though I had this powerful experience of a teacher who empowered me, I was afraid to do that as a teacher. What if it gets noisy? What if it gets chaotic? What if they don't pass the test? What if, right? However, fortunately, I worked with a principal who encouraged innovation, and I worked with fellow teachers who were willing to take that risk, and we would make projects. One of the biggest fears that I encountered when I worked with other teachers were some teachers who would say things like, I'm not very creative. right? But I don't buy into this statement, I'm not that creative. We're all creative. There's no such thing as a creative type. Every single one of us is creative. It's who we are. And so I believe to my core that we should have classrooms that are bastions of creativity and wonder. That students should be making and problem solving and designing and asking their own questions every single day. And the amazing thing is, I know right here that I'm preaching to the choir. I know that this is already happening in the schools that I got to visit. And I believe that students need a maker mindset. In a world of AI and automation, creativity is still the one thing that we as humans do better than machines. Divergent thinking, problem solving, making. The reality is this: our world is changing. My daughter asked this question, were you alive when people had flip phones? I realized, yes, I'm old. My kids will never know the struggle of standing in front of a boombox with the tape cassette, putting your finger on the record button and listening to the radio, waiting to make that epic mixtape, right? When I was younger, it was, Nirvana and Pearl Jam. Just kidding, it was Boyz II Men. But the reality is, they don't know that struggle. Now kids can just say, Alexa, play my favorite song, and it plays, right? My son, I will point this out, my son was like, there's a brand new amazing game on the phone, you should play it, Dad, it's called Crossy Road. I played it for like 2 minutes, and I said, this is called Frogger. I played it as a kid, right? It's totally changed. Before there was Siri, there was Clippy. And Clippy was that was our version of Siri, right? We try to tell you what to do. Oh, you're trying to write a letter? Good luck, right? We have this amazing connective and creative power at the palm of our hands. We know this. And yet, what do we do with that? I took a student survey my last year of the classroom, and I actually replicated this survey. I taught in a low-income school. I replicated the survey with a high-income school, and the results were the same 5 years later. These were the results. 158 out of 160 had watched videos with their technology, but only 4 of them had actually created and edited videos. 159 had listened to audio, but only 3 of them had created and edited audio. 152 had played games on their devices, but none of them had actually created new games with things like Scratch. The reality is, in the US, we use the term digital native, but they're not digital natives. They're consumer natives. In the US, the most popular YouTube channel for young kids are called unboxing videos. Do you know what an unboxing video is? It's literally what it sounds like. You open up a box and you talk about what's inside. It's the worst part of a children's birthday party turned into a YouTube channel. That's what it is. And I would argue what we want to see is students developing a maker mindset instead. We want to see them be unabashedly different and creative. So what does that mean? When this happens, there are some definite things that we see as a result when we empower them with voice and choice.
What happens when teachers design projects that empower students with voice and choice? Students embrace a maker mindset. They define themselves as inventors and creators. They learn to take creative risks. Here they experiment and engage in iterative thinking. When this happens, they embrace a growth mindset and grow resilient. They become problem solvers and systems thinkers. They become divergent thinkers, thinking outside the box. They'll use creative constraint to find original uses for materials. Here they discover it's okay to be different. Often students embrace curiosity and wonder. They become explorers, seeking out new information and thinking critically. They grow more empathetic as they design meaningful products that they launch to the world. On an academic level, students are more engaged and the information sticks. There's often an increase in student achievement. Meanwhile, they learn key skills like project management, collaboration, and communication. True, these projects will prepare students for the creative economy, but more importantly, they empower students for a creative life. Here they see that making is magic. We know that there's a time crunch in schools. Materials can be scarce. Sometimes you're stuck with a tight curriculum map. But when you, as a teacher, empower your students with voice and choice, they become the makers who change the world.
And so I want to think about, what does it mean for us to empower our students to own that entire process? Now, I'm going to share the launch process. I'm going to do this part quickly, but I want to be clear. You can use all kinds of different frameworks. This is my framework, but there are other ones out there that work equally well. So, the first place is your awareness. That's when you're tapping into student interest in the very beginning. And this is the look, listen, and learn phase. And there's a lot of places that you can begin. In some cases, you might begin with a product in mind. You know your students are going to make a documentary. They're going to do a blog. They're going to design a bridge. Other times, it's awareness of an issue. Maybe there's some kind of issue that's going on in your world. Where I live, we suddenly had no drinking water because of algae in the lake. And the cause of that was climate change. That's an awareness of an issue. In some cases, it's a natural phenomenon, and that spurs on innovation. Sometimes it's geeky interest, right? We all have things that we geek out about, things that we love. I mention this because we had two students. Here's a high-level student, Isabel. She loved biology. She loved animals, and she would write these beautiful, amazing blog posts. The cool thing is, she's now getting her biology degree. I love it. She's still continuing with that passion. But then, what about the students who are a little behind, who are a little lower? This is Marco, and Marco struggled. And his teachers kept saying, well, because he's at a low level, he just needs remediation. He shouldn't get voice and choice. He shouldn't get to make his own decisions. But I watched Marco grow into a writer when he got to write about video games, and then the history of video games, and then the top 10 video games and cheat codes. The reality is he grew into a writer. Sometimes it's a problem that needs to be solved. I mentioned that I grew up in the 1980s, and I distinctly remember that somebody realized haircuts were messy, and they came up with the ultimate solution called the Flowbee. Now, you probably didn't have it in Hong Kong, and you're all the better for that. Because I begged my mom for a Flowbee, and she said no, because I would use it on the dog. And she was right. So I never got a Flowbee, but I mention this because sometimes what students design does not change the world. What they design does not seem significant. What they design seems, quite honestly, weird. And that's okay, because it's what's happening in their mind that matters. Sometimes their ideas aren't perfect, and that's okay. But at some point in this phase, you should develop empathy. Now, this is an example that's not from the classroom, but it is my favorite example of empathy in design.
it down here.
Read the letter first. Read the letter first. What letter?
There's a letter in there.
You don't love it.
Open it up and read it. What's it say?
Emma's doll.
Dear Emma's...
What?
You gotta be kidding me.
No!
Show it to us.
It's got a leg like me!
Oh. Do you love her?
I
Oh. So you gotta finish reading the letter. So, Mommy and Daddy had it sent off to this company, a step-fed prosthetics, and so they said after she arrived, she was given a room to stay while her new leg was being made. She was fitted with a leg in her favorite color pink and started walking on it right away. After a few weeks of training to walk and run in her new prosthetic, she is ready to go home and live her life without limitations with you. Oh, okay.
What do you say to the people?
Tell them
Thank you!
thank you.
Thank you for making it all like me!
Oh.
So, little background. What that is somebody realized that American Girl dolls were really popular. But there was one group left out. People who had prosthetic limbs. So they created an organization where you could send in your American Girl dolls and they would create limbs for those dolls that would match the girls that wanted those dolls. That's empathy in design. It didn't take the greatest technological expertise, right? In their case, it was literally having a 3D printer and having minimal understanding of engineering. That's all it took. The power was in the empathy and the audience. For us, we had a problem with graffiti in our neighborhood where I taught. And my students did a community needs assessment. They interviewed people, they did surveys, they looked at the data, and they found out that the biggest problem was graffiti. That's what people cared about the most. So they began to build empathy with the most unlikely group, the people who actually did graffiti. We worked with the police station and we talked to people who had gotten caught doing graffiti and were paying money in restitution. And my students interviewed them and they found out that there were places where graffiti was common. The back of the Walmart was a giant white canvas begging to be painted. But the Catholic church across the street never got tagged. That was a sacred space. The library, the brand new library, that was a sacred space, never tagged up. And so they pitched their solution to a panel. We had the principal, we had a business owner, and we had a community activist. And they came up with this idea: what if school looked more like a sacred space and less like a Walmart? And we painted murals. That's empathy in design. From there, the goal is for them to ask lots of questions, and that they are generating the questions a lot. One of the most humbling things for me as a teacher was when I did an audit of who asks questions in my classroom. And I found out that students asked questions 2% of the time. I ask questions 98% of the time. And I realized things have to change. They need to be asking more questions. They need to leave school more curious, not less curious. They need to be chasing that curiosity. From there, they move to a place where they understand the process or the problem. This is when they're engaging in authentic research. After that, they begin to navigate ideas. And the goal here is that they are generating their own solutions, their own ideas. I love this quote from Chris Lehman, who says, if you assign a project and get back 30 of the exact same thing, that's not a project, that's a recipe. Sadly, I have had way too many recipes as a teacher that I called projects because I was unwilling to let go of some of that control. In this phase, you start out by having students brainstorm. And from the brainstorming, you then have them designing the parts of their project. PART stands for product idea. Audience, they should have a clear sense of who their audience is. Role, so who's doing what. Tasks, and then solution. How does this solve a problem? Afterwards, they create a prototype. Now, sometimes you make products, like our solar kitchen project. Again, this is the power of an authentic audience. There's a teacher that I got a chance to work with, and she was doing an amazing, like a lot of teachers do solar ovens, but she actually partnered with a non-government organization, an NGO in Africa, and a mission group in Africa, and they created these solar ovens with the village rather than for the village, and it was powerful. Sometimes you make digital products like blogs and podcasts and documentaries, and that's prototyping too. Sometimes you make a difference. You make a change in the world. This can sometimes be tough. This can sometimes mean wading into controversial things. This can sometimes mean stepping into a place that's uncertain. But again, it's a chance for students to create a difference. For us, it was poverty. Even though my students were poor, they created solutions for the local community, and they were empowered to make a difference on our Social Voice project. Now, what if you don't have the best materials? The reality is these are chances to innovate as a teacher. Yes, it's amazing to have maker spaces with great technology, but sometimes duct tape, cardboard, paper, sometimes those are where the creativity happens as well. From there, they move to a place where you highlight and fix, and this is where they are revising their work. This is a chance for students to learn iterative thinking and humility. It's not that you want students to embrace failure, but to fail forward. Right? The idea is that failure is permanent, but failing is temporary. Right? You don't want to embrace failure. Do you know what it means to embrace failure? It's called U.S. men's soccer. That's what it is. That's embracing failure. We don't even qualify for the World Cup. Seriously, what's wrong with us? Right? We want to fail forward. It's also the idea that every mistake is another iteration closer to success. And it's a chance to celebrate risk-taking and problem-solving. When that's done, at some point, and they've owned this entire creative process, it's a chance to launch. And when they launch, they connect the learning to their world. They find their creative voice. They engage in that iterative thinking. They work harder than ever. They become fearless. Because the reality is, every time you launch, you're saying, I'm not afraid to be known. I was afraid to be known as a 13-year-old. Launching changed my confidence. Marco was afraid to be known. And then when he published his blog to an audience, he suddenly had people who would listen to him. He was pushing their thinking. The first time Marco clicked publish on a post and did that video game blog, my heart sank because he had forgotten to edit it. And when I saw 10 comments pop up, I was so worried that kids were picking on him. But that's not what happened, because every comment was a word of affirmation. He had a whole team of students rooting for him. And too often student work ends up in a refrigerator or a backpack or a teacher's desk. But launching is saying your voice should go out to the world. This is my favorite project. This is not from my class, but it's my favorite project as a launch. This is Trevor Muir's class in Grand Rapids, Michigan. If you know anything about Grand Rapids, Michigan, it's cold. That's all you need to know. Never go there because it's cold. Now his students were learning about World War II. And so he said, let's make a documentary. Let's capture the story of World War II soldiers. And so his students went through this process. They asked questions. They did research. They began to interview these former soldiers. And then they started to storyboard and edit and eventually create a finished documentary. When he talked to his students about the audience, they said, we don't want the audience to be our class. We worked hard on this. We want the city to see this documentary. And he was like, okay, the city, the whole city of Grand Rapids. Yes, the city should see this. And so his students called every single movie theater until they could get someone to donate a screen one night. And then they called every single carpet place because it was important to them that they could roll out red carpet just like they do in Hollywood premieres. And so the night of the premiere, these soldiers walked down the red carpet as people cheered for them to watch the premiere of their story of World War II. And it was a powerful launch. That summer, one of the soldiers passed away, and his daughter called the student who had done the interview and said, could we use that video at his memorial service? And the student said, absolutely. And she said, we never knew any of that. We knew that our father had fought in the war, but he never talked about it. He was a closed book. He was unemotional. She said, we never saw him cry until we saw him cry on the video. We never knew what he went through in the war. We didn't know about how my parents met and fell in love. We thought they met after the war. We didn't know that they were writing letters during the war. And all of that would have been gone if it hadn't been captured and shared by students. To me, that's the power of a launch. Now, I want to end with this thought that sometimes it doesn't work perfectly. We painted 8 murals in 3 years. And then we got a new leader in charge. And the first thing she said was, I don't think that the murals look very professional. And they're not. They're made by kids, right? And so we came back from spring break, and one of the murals was already painted white, and there was already graffiti. And a mural that we had painted and hung inside was already in the dumpster. And I remember this one student said, I don't want to share any of my work because people are just going to hate on it. And I remember saying, actually, That's the one thing that nobody can take away from you is your creative voice. People are going to sometimes not like your work. That's okay. Sometimes your work gets destroyed and it really is not fun. But the bottom line is, when you hide your voice, you rob the world of your creativity. And I'm not going to let you do that. And I didn't realize until I drove home that I had just quoted Mrs. Smoot. Although that's a sad ending to the story, here's the silver lining to that story. There was a really quiet student that was sitting in that class. And she's now a really bold, confident, amazing middle school teacher at that school. Her name's Alejandra. And one of the teachers that I worked with, Derek, is now the principal at that school. And so when her students were talking to her about projects they wanted to do and someone suggested a mural, she said, absolutely. And now they're working with one of the students who drew the very first mural, and he is an artist in residence. Now, his full-time job is actually that he does design work for video games. But he is working with students to create murals. And now there are murals all over the school district. And to me, it's this reminder that it really is not about what you make. It's not about the product. It's not even about the process, although the process matters. It's about the people. And it's about the relationships that we as teachers have with our students, where they feel empowered to create and to make.